Welcome to the weirdest talk. My name is David Everitt Howe. I'm Curator-at-Large here at Pioneer Works, and I curated the Milk Debt exhibition of Patty's upstairs. I wanted to quickly just introduce the both artists here. Patty Chang, in the center, is an LA-based artist and educator, a professor at the University of Southern California, Los Angeles. And she's exhibited at MoMA, the Guggenheim, the Hammer, MCA Chicago, and many other places. Jes Fan, lives and works in Hong Kong. He has shown at the Liverpool Biennial, Sydney Biennial, Hayward Gallery, Empty Gallery, and you're going to be in a show at the New Museum, right?
Yeah, possibly.
Possibly? Sorry. Never mind, retract.
I mean, it is happening, but I still have to make the work. So,
just kidding. Yeah. I didn't say that. Never mind. So we're going to start with Patty's presentation first.
Okay, so we were also just talking that we have not spoken live in front of people for like over a year, so that's a little bit of the awkwardness, so thanks. Just wanted to put that out there. Okay, so I'm talking a little bit about milk debt tonight, and in the summer of 2018, I was feeling quite overwhelmed with anxiety. A lot of it, I think, in relation to climate change as well as the political situation in the U.S. And so I was prompted to make a list of everything that I was afraid of at that moment. And at that time, I happened to be researching at the Huntington Library in San Marino, California, which is this image behind me. And San Marino is quite a wealthy suburb that's not far from my house. Henry Huntington's grandfather was one of the 4 railroad tycoons who built the Transcontinental Railroad. And he continued to build on the family's wealth in LA by expanding the railroad system, the railway system in LA to the sprawling footprint that it is today. And so the library is housed on the grounds of his former mansion. So that summer, I'm sorry, this could take a lot longer than 15 minutes.
You know, we're just gonna go with the flow here. So
that summer it hit like 117 degrees Fahrenheit, and wildfires were burning in LA. And I also have to look over my glasses.
Where is this image from, Patty? Where is this image from?
Okay, I'm going to tell you, David. This is the research space at the Huntington Library. It's the Amundsen Reading Room. And so wildfires are burning. It's 117 degrees. But, inside the research library, the climate is very well controlled and a very comfortable 68 degrees. So this privilege of being able to control the environment was not lost on me. So as with serious research institutions, you can't bring your own paper in, but you have to take notes on the paper that they provide for you. And so in the Huntington, their note-taking paper is pink, and it has their logo at the top. And I made my list of fears in the Amundsen Reading Room, and it was 4 pages long. So this is the first page. I'm going to read it to you. Death, Leroy's future death, death of the human species, death of the earth, but that is irrational. Flooding, drowning in a flood, fire, burning in a fire, heights, smog, 113 degrees every day. Water running out. What terrible things will happen when the water runs out? What terrible things I will do when food and water are scarce? Leroy is an old man seeing, living, feeling the apocalypse, if he makes it. Loss of meaning. Moving forward means moving closer to death. Lemmings, sharks in the water when I see a seal. Murky water, pitch black night. Drowning in the murky water. Leroy in the ocean with the floaty. Pain, suffering, eating maggots. So it was a relief to know that some of my fears were irrational, but also I was afraid of the fact that these consequential things were out of my control. When I printed this list, as a zine, I got this response from this young person, this young gentleman, that it was, for him, equally comforting and frightening. And so I guess comforting to know that someone else feels this way and, expresses it, but also frightening that there's a lot in the world that we can't control and don't have answers to. So since about February 2019, I've been working on this project, Milk Debt, which is a multi-part video project of women who are pumping breast milk while reciting lists of fears. The fears were collected from various communities in specific geographical regions. Milk Debt is a project where I explore environmental and affective concerns. This project creates a snapshot of the current environmental, political, and affective moment. Sites of conflict over democracy, nationalism, citizenry, human rights, borders, climate change, migration, and a woman's body as the context in which this project unfolds. So the aim of this project is to take this temperature at this moment in history, and how do we acknowledge this uncertainty in daily life? The title Milk Debt refers to the idea in Chinese Buddhism that a child is forever indebted to its mother for the milk she gave. Breast milk is created from blood when the body starts to produce the hormones prolactin and oxytocin. Oxytocin is also produced when one is in love. So in this state of love and survival, milk debt is an arrangement that binds us to our history and to the earth in an unpayable debt. The performance acts as a type of ritual in which the performer channels the fears of others into public speech, in turn transforming them from individual into the communal. And as with a lot of projects I work on, I don't always know exactly what I'm doing when I start. And this project started with me making this list of fears. And once I realized that they were relatable, I was interested in gathering like an accumulation of fears from multiple people, from many people, so that it could be collective. At the same time, I was wanting to think about this act of lactation and what happens transformatively to the body when a woman produces breast milk. Body fluids have been an interest and a material of mine in my earlier work, and specifically, breast milk was pumped and discarded in my project, The Wandering Lake, when I was researching the shrinking of the Aral Sea. The Soviet government pumped the waters that were flowing to the Aral Sea, and they redirected them for irrigation purposes. They were using the Central Asian republics as their cotton-producing and agricultural regions. At the time I was weaning my child, when I was traveling to the shoreline, which had, shrunken. But I continued to pump and dump it in containers and documenting them along the way. I was interested in this act because of the production of the hormones prolactin and oxytocin, which are released and signal to the body to put fluids from the blood to be turned into breast milk. Oxytocin is also produced when falling in love. Part of the release of hormones directs the woman to have these feelings for the baby, this new thing that she must now keep alive. And the feelings of love are for survival. So in 2019, when I started working on this, I found an actress, and she's also a theater director, Kestrel Lee. She was lactating. She had a newborn baby. And I asked her to work with me to sort of think about this idea of lactation through this act of breast pumping in relation to other actions or other language or other thinking. So after I first met her, I asked her to make a list of her own fears, and she did it while she was pumping breast milk at work. So I eventually asked other friends and acquaintances to also make lists of fears, and I edited them into a script with maybe about 10 to 12 people's fears for her to use as a script. So on the first day of shooting, the actress had memorized her list, and I was ready to shoot, and she put on the breast shields and the breast pump, And when the milk started flowing, she forgot her lines. She forgot what she was supposed to say. So we're not exactly certain about this relationship between the flow of milk and the flow of memory. So I ended up getting a teleprompter, and we resumed testing out pumping while reading lists of fears. And we tried it in different situations, mostly interior spaces, intimate spaces, spaces for expressing. This image is at a recording studio. Expressing is a term used for speaking, but also in English, it's used for the production of breast milk. Like we use the phrase expressing breast milk when it comes out. So in the spring of 2019, I was also invited to be a visiting artist in Hong Kong at the Hong Kong University, and I was invited to work with students in a project and also to participate in an academic conference called Old Land, New Grounds. And this was a conference that dealt with geography and land, which really affects Hong Kong because the land is limited and what they have is impacted. So instead of thinking literally about land, I wanted to think about the affective states of people in the land, people that occupied a particular place. So I worked with the students at Hong Kong University to gather a list of fears from their particular communities, their families, friends. And then I worked with a woman who was a school teacher as well as a lactation activist to perform this list. We rehearsed the list, and I edited some of it so that it would be smooth for her to read. And because it goes continuously on a teleprompter, and there's no time for rereading or mistakes. So we filmed the rehearsals in spaces for expressing, such as karaoke clubs. So Milk was staged as a live performance in this stadium seating theater where a list of fears gathered from people living in Hong Kong was read while the performer pumped breast milk for an audience also living in Hong Kong. And the date of this live performance is June 8th, 2019. So the next day, June 9th, was the first large protest against the extradition bill or the Fugitive Offenders Ordinance bill, where about 1 million people demonstrated in Hong Kong. And we performed Milk Debt on an overhead walkway at the beginning of the march. So upon returning to LA after this, I started working on gathering lists of fears for an exhibition at 18th Street Art Center in Santa Monica, which is in the LA area. We collected lists through students at the local college, local community groups, at the library, and also on social media. And they were edited into scripts that were read by performers in locations such as the Aqueduct, and this is the Cascades that brings water into the LA Basin, and the LA River, which this is where this one is. So LA has a real alternating weather patterns, severe weather patterns of rain and flood, as well as severe drought. That makes it, okay. Yeah, so it has extreme weather. Next. It's getting harder and harder to read and look up. Everything's getting blurry. Okay.
Here's a fear for you.
Other locations include the metro, which is this. So spaces of movement and flow, like those are all other locations that I thought about. And also once the pandemic hit and the city shut down with quarantine, we migrated the performances online to video conferencing platforms like Zoom, Skype, and FaceTimes as locations, which mirror our physical distance and displacement. So this is, pretty much a glimpse of the whole year, the last whole year. We're gonna leave it there.
Yeah.
Thanks, Patty. So I guess now is my turn to show my slides, but before I do that, I have some confessions to make. Patty, so when I was in college, and I just moved to New York to work as an artist assistant. The artist I worked for asked me to list out my artist mothers and artist fathers, and you're one of my artist mothers of plenty, of like 20 people. So it's actually such an honor to be here on stage, here with you, accompanying your work, and to speak, have a conversation with you in that regard.
Can I also make a confession, since we're on the confession?
Yes.
Should I show the sketch? I probably shouldn't show the sketchbook.
Yes, please.
Should I show the
please,
sketch?
Please,
I brought it.
Please.
This is going to be really embarrassing. Hold on. So when I was an undergrad at SCAD as an art school student, I made this sketchbook in 3D fibers. I made it myself with hand sort of like onion dyed fabric. And then I was asked to sort of give my art, mother, people, whatever. And then, look who's there. Patty Chang. And then I even have like an art forum review that I put in there, and I wrote, "Endurance art, my kind of thing." Isn't that sweet? And here we are, more than a decade later.
I feel like I've fed you both my breast milk.
So I didn't want her to turn to like a
Milk debt,
love Patty
milk
Chang fest, but it happened. Anyways.
So before I start talking about my work, 2020 has been such a huge kind of change for everyone. And funny, when David had just approached me to do this talk and learning about this whole new series of work, Milk Debt, I was also aware that in 2020, I also was going through a 12-step program and compiling my own list of fears. So I do want to share a little bit of my list that I've edited because it can't be too vulnerable in front of everyone here. So it's going to be short. I'm going to share a little bit before my work. Number 1, I am terrified of not making it. Number 2, I am terrified of having to buy my birthday cake this year. Number 3, I am terrified there's no God. Number 4, I am terrified of acting out. Number 5, I am terrified of being financially unstable. Number 6, I am terrified that my visa will not renew this year. I am terrified of my dad dying. I am terrified of living with my mother. I am terrified of the quarantine lifting and the daycare below me reopening. I might murder. I am terrified of being a source of shame for my family. I'm terrified of going through top surgery without a lover as a caretaker. I'm terrified of motor accidents. I'm terrified that I will lose my parents and I cannot be there. I'm terrified of becoming my mother. I'm terrified of becoming obese and erratic, my mother. I am terrified of losing. I'm terrified of getting top surgery and asking what's next. I'm terrified of eating a roach, which I almost did today. And yeah, I know.
Are you serious?
Serious. And sometimes your fears are actually not that terrifying. I mean, you just gotta accept it. Number 19, I'm terrified of making the wrong decision for things that cannot reverse course. So, and I'm also terrified of being on stage, so bear with me today. So I'm gonna start with the newest work that I completed during the quarantine. This work was for the Liverpool Biennial, this is just a phone picture that the installation team sent me. And it's a series of 3 glass sculptures. They're entirely made out of borosilicate glass. And funny, Patty and I also share the same fabricator, which is like, there's too many Venn diagrams here. In each of the glass form, there's sort of like a tumorous mass, and in the mass they contain this kind of black mold that I specifically wanted to grow because it looks so much like, hair. I was really, at the time during COVID, I was doing a lot of research about, actually prior to COVID, when I started working with E. coli in 2018, I was really interested in this idea of productive contamination and working alongside with species that are kind of seen as invasive or dangerous or perilous to health, but actually is productive in some means, and black mold became one of them. And black mold, little did I know, that is the source of how citric acid is produced commercially, which is essentially how all preserved foods are made. So in these like intricate glass kind of scientific glass networks, they cradle this form that it just looks like a slice of, like if someone had cut out like a slice of hair, a slice of like meat that contains hair. It looks like Asian hair in particular. And they're fairly large. They're around 100 inches long and by 55 inches wide. This is a smaller piece in that series. And I really like to think of them in network. And I grew up in Hong Kong, and that's the city I'm from. I'm currently based in New York, but Hong Kong's always going to be home. My family's all there. And growing up, you just encounter a lot of architecture or cityscapes that are so entrenched within nature. Like, I like to think of this network akin to this image, what it's doing here, the glass network within the cityscape of Brooklyn. There's this is another snapshot I took in Shangwan in Hong Kong. It's kind of all braced by these banyan trees that holds up the cityscape in such a surrealist way. There's another image. This is another example of banyan trees. It was just circling through the entire cement floor, and then underneath these benches, and and they're all interconnected because trees are all they all share the same network, and older trees actually know how to feed other trees that are deplete of nutrient by relying on the fungal network, on the mycelial network. So a lot of the architecture and the formal kind of aspects of my work do borrow from that experience of growing up between this highly contested, highly urbanized, and also extremely close to nature kind of environment. And this is the mold that we worked with. It's called Psychospore, and this is an example of it in the globe. And this is some of the process of growing it. And in working in tandem with contamination, it's actually quite hard to prevent it from other contaminants, because spores, like viruses, are just everywhere. It's viral. It's potent. We're breathing in spores at the moment also. And that actually is really similar to how I think about kinship at times, like how to build kin beyond blood. And here's actually a great example of how the spores, the spore pockets of the fungus is like popping throughout the condensation of, throughout the process of the silicone curing. It kind of encapsulate those little brown pockets as those spores coming out of the organism. So prior to COVID, I just did this show in March 2020 for the Sydney Biennial at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney. And there's two shelves. One's called Form Begets Function. The other one's called Function Begets Form. And they all borrow the motif from, I think through furniture a lot, especially through Chinese antiques. And the whole gallery is lit up by this video called Xenophoria, which I'll show later. And they all kind of borrow from these medical diagrams of the body, especially of the derma. And I kind of stole this relationship that you see a lot in Chinese antiques, where this very elaborate stone or scholar rock is held up by an elaborate wooden carved base. The indentation is suggesting that the object can be removed from the base. And there's something so eerie when you hold your own blood against your own skin, but it's actually not your own blood. Or in instances seeing certain matter, certain, especially really hyper-racialized or hyper-gendered materials being isolated in its own kind of blob and just being completely abstract. So in 2018, I started this series called Systems at Recess when I was doing a residency there. And I was working with another lab called Brooklyn Bio to make melanin out of E. coli, specifically eumelanin, not pheomelanin, because there's two types of melanin in the human body. And I was really interested in the relationship between the abstract and the literal, and how the literal can sometimes be the most abstract. They each contain, this glass form has estrogen in it. And these are both of the works at Hayward Gallery in London. So the process of growing melanin out of E. coli was actually, I like to think of it akin to how when I used to fabricate artwork for other artists, I sign their work or I make their work for them, and this is just a scientist fabricating elements of my work for me. And like E. coli, maybe thinking of E. coli almost similar to how I think about plaster in the studio in that way. We introduced a plasmid that contains the enzyme tyrosinase to the E. coli and had it gradually melanize over time. It was kind of like under UV light, so it was kind of a tanning process. And then we froze these plates, and then we scraped the pigmented E. coli, and then we grind them almost like into these little flecks. And then these little flecks would start secreting the pigment out, so I can use it within the glass forms. It really does look like pee in some way. And you know, like Patty, when I start my work, I really don't know what I'm making. Also, a lot of times when I'm making the work, I also don't know what I'm making. And the whole research process of doing this residency at Recess, I really had no idea what I was making. I was following through one scientific paper to another scientific paper, and which amounted to this video that was the backdrop for the Form Begets Function pieces for the Sydney Biennial. In it, it's called Xenophoria, following the name of a shell, which bears the same name, and the shell will show up later in the video. But I was thinking of collecting images similar to the way that the carrier shell collects other kind of species on the sea floor, like how it grafts these other species onto its own spine, but in a spiral and nonsensically. So it was just a series of images of me sourcing for melanin, eumelanin in human bodies and non-human bodies in pictures in the lab. This is the shell here. It is also called the artist shell because
No way.
Yeah. I'm the kind of adult that wanders through Natural History Museum alone, like often, and I found this shell and I felt so akin to it. And it was called the artist shell because biologists can't specifically explain why they do that, why they gather other shells to decorate themselves, so they called it the artist shell. Yeah. I'm gonna move on to the next slide. So thinking about kin, I think this work is probably quite similar to the idea of this interspecial kin, or when I first started thinking about kin, really, with this project that I did at Empty Gallery in Hong Kong called Mother's a Woman.
Mother is a woman, is beyond a beauty cream. Freshly harvested from a single source origin, each ester invites you to be feminized by my mother. Using artisanal technology, we work closely with laboratories in the US to extract the purest estrogen from my mother's urine. Beyond a beauty cream, Mother is a Woman invites you to rethink kinship through the pores of your skin. Can our epidermis be our first contact of kinship? As your skin absorbs my mother's estrogen, you are feminized by her. Mother is a woman, asks, who are you to her? And who are you to me? To apply, gently rub the cream onto your skin. In circular motions, in small dosages, or in liberal quantities. Mother is a woman can be applied however you want, daily or weekly, or whenever you miss home. Kin is where the mother is.
So, mother is a woman is actually like a Cantonese phrase that if you were to say something, it's actually for comical effect. So, if you were to say something overtly basic, like, or like, you know, binaristic, like if you say the tree is green, and someone would respond back, who doesn't know your mother is a woman? And, yeah, and by, you know, putting them next to each other and just asserting that mother is a woman, it kind of begets asking, are all mothers necessarily a woman, you know? This was shown at the Times Museum in Guangzhou, and during the opening at Empty, like we actually had gallery attendants to, in lab coats, giving people to like feel, like examples, like have them, the cream be distributed that way. And I do want to end my slides with this image of baby hippo Fiona. She was separated from her mother because she was born prematurely. And because she was born prematurely, they separated her and reintroduced her to her mother like 3 months later. And then the first instinct that Fiona had was to crawl back into her mother's mouth. And I thought that would be a good backdrop for our discussion today.
There we go. Jay, I wanted to ask you, as you research sort of on your work, and you mentioned a hyperallergic, that one of your major influences was Patty Chang's In Love.
Oh, did I?
Yeah, you did. Is that true?
I mean, I know, the internet never dies, huh? Yeah, I think so. I think I really, it was also, you know, I think in RISD I didn't see a lot of Asians being talked about, Asian artists that were being talked about by my teachers, so I had to do a lot of research on my own and to find my own kind of lineage, and I stumbled upon Patty's work actually in the library, just bumbling around in the library.
But what was that piece, Patty? Do you remember?
In
It was
Love?
mom and
It's
dad
the one with my mom and dad and we
doing
eat
this.
the onion.
Yeah.
Right. But what of that piece in particular did you like find resonant, or did you sort of, was it just the idea of kinship, or that the parents were involved, or was it something else?
I can't quite put in work particularly, but you know, when something produces like a gut feeling you can't explain is often the most powerful feeling. And it's just that emotion that I can't erase. And it's not something that's logical. It's not because we're I mean, obviously like shared cultural background, but
Yeah.
I think more importantly, it's how funny it was too, and how it just shoots in the dark, like actually there was an onion involved in the act, it was so, yeah, it was something that was so deeply rooted.
Yeah.
I can't particularly formulate in words right
Yeah.
now. Yeah.
Well, it's funny you both used your parents in your work. I think you were saying earlier that your mother was very reluctant to sort of she contributed her urine to Mother as a Woman, right?
Yes, yeah. So, and then I extracted her estrogen from her pee, and then I actually had to bring it across border from Hong Kong to Baltimore, and then shove it into like a deep freezer, and then extract her estrogen, and then told her to come to the show. And she thought we were making fun of her, but it wasn't. The intent really wasn't. But I really had to explain to her what the impulse was. Yeah.
And Patty, what about your parents? Were they sort of game to be in your work, or was it like a big push-pull kind of thing?
For that particular piece, I had the idea. I did it with a friend of mine, Everitt, who's here. And my parents actually saw that piece, and I said, oh, I'd like to do that piece with you. I told my mom this, and she went and asked my dad. And then she reported back.
That's so gendered of her.
She reported back that he said that, oh no, she said she would do it, but she would ask him because, she didn't know. And she reported back that he said that he would be willing to do it. But because, he didn't like to eat onions. And but that, once in a while was okay. I mean, I think it's kind of interesting, thinking about what you had said about this idea of kinship and the work, but also this idea of the gut punch or whatever, because I find that your work is also very much about the body, or maybe some kind of knowledge through the body as well. And, in a lot of the instances, the body is sort of, in its form that we know it, dematerial, but is, but in the pure forms of, the extractions are also there, right? Like through the urine and the estrogen. So there's something about an invisibility, or, like the form not being there, but some kind of, like a search for an essence or essentialness that begs the question when you do that.
It's totally absurd. It's totally absurd when the most literal of what if we were to seek for the smallest unit of race, and here's the melanin, and in its purest form, is actually completely absurd, right?
And it's so abstract too.
Exactly. Like it actually doesn't amount to anything. Right? It has to be, it is not a metonym of itself. It has to be socialized in order to accrue the kind of metonymic status it has now, right? As being such a politicized kind of substance. Yeah.
Totally. I also wanted to, I wanted to muse on how in Milk Debt, how I sort of view it is it's really funny at times because the fears are irrational. Also, my fears are in there, by the way. So that's kind of funny, and they're really dark. It was during the height of COVID, and I almost could sense a change in tone between the different sort of times and cities. To me, it seemed like the New York ones were uniformly just really dark, less funny. But I think the flip between sort of the humorous fears, the terrifying fears, the fears that we all kind of recognize in ourselves and our own fears, and also the irrational fears of others, and the sort of how quickly it goes between these different registers is what's interesting, because there is the gut punch, but there's also the humor is there as well. And that's kind of always been in your work, I think. Even in the very beginning, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the lists are funny in how unexpected they can be in time, like as they unfold. And that was one of my favorite parts of working with the language of other people, or the thoughts of other people, but also their language. As a friend told me, it's quotation. They're quotations, But just the thought process, because the prompt I give is that it should be stream of consciousness. Just like write everything down, don't edit for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever. And so reading them as I got them, I just loved like what led to what, because sometimes the fears were completely everyone has, or large fears about society or the world, but then that can lead to these other irrational fears. All fears, I guess, could be considered irrational. That are really jarring, and I think that creates this tension of like just the expectation of where something is going. And
but you would see throughways in the fears, like you would see throughways, like sort of one thing would lead to another, and there were almost like patterns of that to you, or
yeah, what they wrote down, and then what they wrote next, I just reading it as a list, like I tried to not edit the order of the fears as much as I could. I edited for length, I guess, like the pump time of a person, but and repetition, but I tried to keep any kind of pattern or language or thought process that they had, because I think that actually is what's funny, is what what in our mind leads to what thing, and it can be something very small next to something very big, and and just the proximity of those two is really interesting and profound sometimes.
But your fears are not in the piece, right?
There is,
Okay.
just the woman in the bathtub at the very beginning and the very end. So maybe like 10 or 12 fears.
Is there a reason why you didn't want yourself more in the work?
Well, it was more about collectivity than myself. It was really, I put mine in there because that's just how they started. And but it was really about, trying to gather a wide range of different people's voices and, have them sort of seamlessly kind of flow from one to the next, almost that you couldn't tell who's who, or, that was sort of beside the point, but more that it could become a larger, collective consciousness or something like that.
Jay, when you first saw the piece, did you relate to the Hong Kong protest? Did it bring up a lot of stuff for you?
Because the quarantine year is also a year of grieving of the Hong Kong I grew up with. So seeing especially that really familiar architectural space and the protests marching through, like obviously it brings up a lot of homesickness. And I still do really want to go back there. But as of right now, there's a 21-day quarantine mandate.
Still?
Yeah, even for vaccinated people. There, as the video said, like home is where the mother is, right? It's just, kin is where the mother is, and my mom's in Hong Kong, and to put it simply, it's just always gonna be my home in some way, and yeah, it is really, it's so much, like I have so much respect for the woman who bare her chest in front, knowing how conservative the environment is.
Because you don't really do that there, right?
No. I think I was fed by formula because my mom probably was too ashamed to feed me, breast milk. And I think in one video you mentioned that breast milk is made from blood. Is that true? In one of YouTube
it's it's in the. It's extracted from fluid in the body, and the fluid comes out of the blood. So basically breast milk is made out of blood.
Yeah. Have you tasted breast milk?
Yeah, it's very sweet.
Really?
Yeah.
Does it depend on the person, or?
I don't know. I haven't drank anyone else's breast milk.
Right.
Not yet.
I mean, yeah.
That's an idea.
Right. Yeah. I've never drank breast milk before, but
I have, actually.
yeah. From other mammals I have, but not human, yeah.
Is that weird? I don't know.
No. Tell me about your breast milk experience.
So many. No, it was just my friend Bree was breastfeeding, and I have no boundaries, so it was like, or I think she asked me if I wanted to try it, and I was like, oh, I don't know, but I did, and it's very, very sweet, actually.
But blood doesn't taste like that, so.
No, because blood has the salt.
Yeah, so how does that transference happen?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oxytocin. Love.
Yeah, love.
Oxytocin. Yeah.
Love turns it sweet.
Yeah. We should make a commercial.
Yeah.
Retitle the talk. So when you made your list of fears, Patty, the fears were their own kind of thing initially, right? They're sort of like, they had their own kind. They were like their own thing for a long time, and then you kind of folded in breast pumping, right? Like, why did you combine those two together?
Well, I mean, I didn't know that they were going to be together in the beginning. I just
Yeah.
listed my fears because of my anxiety. It was, as Jay has mentioned, a 12-step therapeutic process also. But so I didn't know, I just did it, and then like I said, when other people read it, that it was resonant in some way. I didn't know like what it meant or what I wanted to do with it, but it was just, as language, it was resonant. It had an emotional space, I guess, and so I knew that I was interested in that, and that it made me feel kind of uncomfortable, and in a way that again, the bodily, like knowing that there's something there.
Yeah.
And then I didn't really bring the fears back in until I started working with the actor, thinking about lactation, and that was just one of the things that I asked her to do, and then it seemed like once we were like kind of just doing different combinations of actions or language gestures in relation to pumping, that one stuck, and there seemed to be some push-pull between the body doing this work and this labor, and then the body also like expressing in these different ways together, of the milk, and then also of the language.
Speech.
At the same time.
Mm-hmm. And also the act of breast pumping is so political, even in the U.S., I would say. Like on the train, on the subway, it's not something that you would really would be so exposed. You know
I
what
think
mean?
there's a vulnerability in it, like for other people. Like I think for people who are, or that I've talked to in all of these performers, is that your body's just doing this thing, and other people can shame you, but it's kind of just doing its job in a way. But there is a vulnerability to the nudity or the exposure, and I think that in relation to, like the language, which is very vulnerable and expressive, but of other people's, it kind of pushes against each other. And also, I don't know, were we talking about this, about like, or I don't know if it was with you, but about like the demeanor of the way they speak. I asked them to be kind of just non-expressive, like they're reading a list, like it's very matter of fact the way they speak, and I think that because of this vulnerability of the body, and how people feel when they see that, to have the women also speak in a way that was very plain, like very not without this
so
sort
matter of fact,
without this edge of fear, that it gives them a certain strength in relation to the vulnerability.
The woman on the subway in LA, I forget her name.
Rebecca.
Rebecca. She's so good because her delivery is so like deadpan almost, like just like this fear and this, she looks tired, like this fear and this fear. And it's just like the way it kind of like hits you each time. And she gets like into a rhythm where she's just going, as if like she wasn't even looking at the teleprompter at all. She was just sort of zoning out, made it I think, more successful.
I mean, I think all the performers have a sort of a different demeanor. Even though I just said, just read the list. Like for instance, the woman in the corner channel, she just seems very sad.
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, Devaney. She just seems extremely sad when she's reading the list. There's a real melancholy to her delivery. Nobody's an actor except for Cass.
Yeah, and I do notice in their listing of fears, and even the way that I've listed my own fear inventory, is that some are in present tense and some are in future perfect, right? And then it makes me think about how often is that when we think about fears, we are already, materialized it in the imaginary. It already exists, prior to us actually writing it down in language.
Yeah, we were talking about this outside, how when you write in the present tense, is it as if you're imagining that it's happening, right? That it's, that it's an imagination, but also the fact that without temporality, we would have no fear. Without the past and the future, the fear would not exist.
Yeah, and in Chinese, there's no present, past, perfect, and
I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. It's not time specific.
Yeah, it's all present.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's cool. I think we're kind of at time, unfortunately. But we can continue in the garden. We have the bar open. The fire is going. We're going to hang out a little bit. So
Great.
enjoy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Jess. Thank you, everyone.